parties. Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. INEC says 240 polling units across the country do not have any registered voter. And United States asks its citizens to leave Russia due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. UK opposition Labour Party accuses Conservative government of overseeing lavish spending. My name is Tunde Idowu. We begin in Nigeria. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, says 240 polling units across the country do not have any registered voters, which will impede conduct of the general elections in those locations. The INEC chairman, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, made the disclosure during a meeting with political parties held in Abuja earlier today. According to him, this requires the redistribution of voters to new polling units in proximate locations. Professor Yakubu recalled that the commission had made efforts to redistribute voters to polling units in order to avoid the congestion that made voting cumbersome in many of the polling units nationwide.
However, there are 240 polling units without registered voters spread across 28 states and the Federal Capital Territory. They range from 1 polling unit to 12 polling units in each state and the FCT, except Taraba and Imo states, with 24 and 28 polling units respectively. No new registrants choose the polling units and no voters indicated interest to transfer to them during the last continuous voter registration exercise, mainly for security reasons. This means that no elections will be held in these polling units.
And here in Osun State, citizens have been admonished to treat with relevance the legislative election as much as they do to the presidential election. Olayinka Ali was on the street of Oshogbo to know if the residents know who they are voting for aside their presidential candidates.
Election coverage in Nigeria tends to get skewed towards the presidency, expectedly because of the tremendous influence and powers that the office comes with. The 2023 election is another milestone election because the absence of any former heads of state or incumbent president means there will definitely be a new addition to the list of Nigeria's leaders. But focusing on the presidential election alone would be mistakenly disregarding the other important elections that are taking place, and in some cases much more impactful to Nigerians at certain levels. That is why it is important for citizens to avoid fixating strictly on the presidential elections and also make sure they are informed about the other elections like the State House of Assembly and the National Assembly. Sadly, quite a number of Nigerians don't even know who their candidates are for this election, aside the 3 presidential candidates. St. Morgan and Adetoro Adesoji said they do not know who their candidates for other elections are, simply because the presidential candidates have overshadowed others. The case is, however, different for Sherifat Asimiu, who spoke confidently in her native language, Yoruba, and insisted that citizens know who their candidate is.
And people that didn't know they're really candidate for House of Rep or House of Senate. It's presidents have overshadowed all the candidates again. If they have money as well, contest too. I just tell Nigeria to just try and focus and do the right thing for the right people.
How do we know? Like myself, I don't even know anybody. I don't know anybody. I only know the presidential candidate. I don't know about any other candidates.
Àwọn èèyàn mọ̀ wọ́n torí àwọn tí wọ́n dìbò fún kálukú mọ̀ wọ́n ní Ọ̀ṣun State àtàwọn tí wọ́n wà ní àwọn kéékèèké kì í ṣe pé àwọn bíi àwọn àgbà nìkan ni wọ́n mọ̀ kò ṣẹ́ni tí wọ́n mọ̀ nínú wọn.
On the other hand, Sheriff Olalekan has urged Nigerians to take other elections as important as the presidential election. Because for Nigeria to be great, other arms of government election needs to be treated with relevance.
We need to take it as important because they need to work in hand. But the presidential is the head because it's the one that will control the affairs of the nation. Whether it is controlled in a normal way, the citizen will also benefit from it or otherwise.
Anthony Adejumo, who is the team leader of Urban Alert, an Osun-based non-governmental organization, believes that more attention needs to be focused on legislative elections. According to him, the legislature is just as important as the executive, which is why it must be peopled with politicians of repute.
It's so unfortunate that citizens are not focusing on the legislators, and for me, I feel it's a deliberate attempt to give too much power to the executive. Citizens in Nigeria have actually seen the legislators as not being important when it comes to democracy in Nigeria, and it's so unfortunate.
Meanwhile, the general election comes up on the 25th of February. It appears to certainly that quite a number of Nigerians did not know who their candidate for the State House of Assembly or National Assembly are, as the focus has been solely on the presidential election. Voters should, however, be aware that for Nigeria's democratic system to be further strengthened, it needs a responsive and responsible legislative arm, which is populated by credible, sound, and selfless lawmakers. Olayinka Ale, Western Spring Television News.
And to education stories, the 1,500 displaced teachers that were affected by the executive order given by Governor Ademola Adeleke have made an appeal to the state governor at a peaceful protest today in Osogbo. Our reporter Olayinka Ale was there and continues the story from here.
These are the voices of the 1,500 displaced teachers who have been appealing to the Osun State Governor, Senator Ademola Adeleke, to reinstate them after they were affected by the executive order given by the executive governor during his inauguration on November 27, 2022. At a peaceful protest held at Olaiya, Osogbo, representatives of the displaced teachers were seen carrying placards with various inscriptions, pleading with the governor to allow them get back to work. The coordinator of the 1,500 displaced teachers, Abdulwasiu Owoyemi, stated that he and his colleagues went through due process and procedure of recruitment. He further stated that upon the assumption of duty, subject that lacked teachers virtually in all schools and learning stages across the state, especially the educationally disadvantaged areas, have been reintroduced, and where there are shortages, such subjects were reinforced. Owoyemi has, however, asked that governor look into their request, as they did not want to go back to the streets unemployed again.
We want him to please assist us and help us. We need his own assistance, that we don't want to go back to the street again. So we are the citizen of Osun State. So we want him to re-employ or reabsorb us. So that is what we need from him.
In the same vein, Eunice Ishola raised a voice also and urged Governor Adeleke to consider the 1,500 displaced teachers because she and majority of her colleagues are apolitical and got the job based on merit.
On the very day we came to get the form for this job, and then we had our CBT exams after a year or so, and then we started our interview. And I can tell Mr. Governor that every one of us who got this employment got it on the merits, because there was a cut-off mark which was open to all.
The teachers revealed that the effect of nullifying their appointments as class teachers had already been felt, as they have recorded no fewer than 4 deaths amongst them as a result of depression. Olayinka Ali, Western Spring Television News.
And news outside Nigeria, a 70-year-old woman, Nure Golbers, has been rescued from the rubble of a collapsed 3-story building in Turkey's Hatay province 178 hours after deadly earthquakes hit the region. This comes as a young girl named Miray was rescued from the rubble of an apartment block in the southern Turkish city of Adıyaman earlier. According to broadcaster CNN Talk, the girl was 6-year-old and rescuers were also close to reaching her older sister. The country's disaster management authority said the death toll in Turkey rose to 31,643, taking the total number of deaths from last week's devastating temblors beyond 36,000. The United Nations Aid Chief Martin Griffiths says rescue phase is coming to a close, with urgency now switching to providing shelter, food, schooling, and psychological care.
And what is the most striking here is even in Aleppo, which has suffered so much these many years, this moment, that moment, a week or more ago, was about the worst that these people have experienced. People who lost their children, some of whom escaped, others stayed in the building. The trauma of the people we spoke to was visible. And this is a trauma which the world needs to heal. We're looking at the first 3 months. So the appeals that will go out in the next day or so, one for Syria, one for Turkey, will cover about 3 months of the humanitarian needs. Because what we've seen happening in these zones of the earthquake is that the rescue phase is dragging live people out from the rubble and finding those who died in the rubble. That's coming to a close. And now the humanitarian phase, the urgency of providing shelter, psychosocial care, food, schooling, and a sense of the future for these people. That's our...
To the Russia-Ukraine war, Moldova's President Maia Sandu has accused Russia of planning to use foreign saboteurs to bring down her country's leadership, stop it joining the European Union, and use it in the war against Ukraine. President Sandu's comment comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said last week that his country had intercepted plans by Russian secret services for the destruction of Moldova. Ms. Sandu, whose country borders Ukraine, has repeatedly expressed concern about Moscow's intention towards the former Soviet Republic and about the presence of Russian troops in the breakaway Transnistria region. Ms. Sandu said the plan involved citizens of Russia, Montenegro, Belarus, and Serbia entering Moldova to try to spark protests in an attempt to change the legitimate government to an illegal government controlled by the Russian Federation. She added that the plan for the next period involves actions with the involvement of diversionists with military training, camouflaged in civilian clothes, undertaking violent actions, attacking state buildings, and even taking hostages. Hungary's Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó has paid a visit to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, with the aim of keeping channels of communication open. Mr. Szijjártó announced the trip in a post on his Facebook page, stating that during his trip to Belarus, he will represent the Hungarian stance of trying to achieve peace in Ukraine. Belarus is a major ally of Russia, and Minsk has backed Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine, although it has ruled out joining the war itself. Russia used Belarus as a springboard for its invasion last February, deploying thousands of forces to its neighbor under the pretext of military drills before launching its offensive. The United States has told its citizens to leave Russia immediately due to the war in Ukraine and the risk of arbitrary arrest or harassment by Russian law enforcement agencies. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow, in a new travel advisory note issued yesterday, said U.S. citizens residing or traveling in Russia should depart immediately. The embassy also advised nationals to exercise increased caution due to the risk of wrongful detentions. Similar France's government advised French nationals against going to Belarus, given the new offensive launched by Russia in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Pentagon says fighter jets have shot down an unidentified object flying near the Canadian border in the Midwest, the latest incident since a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon put North American security forces on high alert. Pentagon spokesperson Patrick Ryder, in a statement, said the object was flying at 20,000 feet, and while it was not a military threat, it could have potentially interfered with domestic air traffic. He disclosed that the object was shot down at 2:42 p.m. local time over Lake Orion on the US-Canada border. It was reported that the latest object appeared to be octagonal in structure with strings hanging from it, but no discernible payload. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says China and Russia are increasing their intelligence and surveillance activities against NATO allies. Mr. Stoltenberg said the spy balloons are part of a pattern calling on allies to increase their information gathering and sharing. Mr. Stoltenberg told reporters at a news conference at NATO's headquarters in Brussels, adding that the war in Ukraine is consuming an enormous amount of ammunition, putting the defense industries under strain. He further disclosed that the military alliance plans to increase its target for ammunition stockpiles, which are being depleted by the war in Ukraine. Defense ministers from several NATO member states are due to meet in Brussels tomorrow to discuss possible further military aid for Ukraine.
We saw over the United States, I visited the United States last week, it's part of a pattern where China, but also Russia, are increasing their intelligence and surveillance activities against NATO allies with many different platforms. We see it in cyber, we see it with satellites, more and more satellites, and we see it then with balloons. That highlights the importance of our vigilance, our increased presence, and also that we ramp up and step up how we share intelligence and how we monitor and protect our airspace. And actually, one of the issues we're going to address and decide on the ministerial meeting tomorrow is increased cooperation between allies in space.
You're watching Spring Global and Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break. Please stay with us.
The 1914 Amalgamation Treaty is synonymous to the birth of Nigeria. Frederick Lugard, a British Army captain and an outlaw who struck gold in Africa, became the instrument used by destiny to make it happen. The amalgamation of Nigeria was designed for economic reasons by the colonial administration to offset Northern Protectorate budget deficit by Southern Protectorate surplus returns. The amalgamation had been issue created imbalance in the economic political structure of Nigeria and was responsible for the persistent hiccups and the efforts to forge a united country till today. Nigeria's amalgamation was labeled as the mistake of 1914 by native northern conservatives who neither wanted it nor contributed anything significant to its sustenance. Western Spring Television identifies with Amalgamation Treaty of 1914 as a watershed event in history.
Thank you for staying with us and welcome back. In the United Labour has accused the Conservative government of overseeing lavish spending on hotels, hospitality, and other costs using taxpayer-funded debit cards. The bills have been highlighted in a Labour study of spending on government debit card in 2021, which include £3,393 on 13 fine arts photographs and £23,457 on alcohol for UK embassies abroad. Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner said Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had failed to rein in the culture of lavish spending across Whitehall on his watch. Party analysis showed a scandalous catalogue of waste with taxpayers' money frittered away across every part of government. However, a Conservative Party spokesperson said Labour spent almost £1 billion on the cards known as government procurement cards in 2009 when the party was last in government.
We've seen scandal and we've seen sleaze. We've seen billions of pounds wasted under the Conservative government that we have now and no action to clear up this mess. We've been very clear that we would set up an Ethics and Integrity Commission that's independent, that can look into these issues and can ensure it's regulated, and our Office for Value for Money will ensure that every pound of taxpayers' money is spent, they're getting the best out of that money and that it's not being wasted. And these credit cards are a way of bypassing the normal auditing process. And we're seeing, when it comes to the end of the financial year, big jumps in the spend. And we're seeing expenditure which is just not justifiable during the cost of living crisis. So there has to be transparency and there has to be regulation of the use of these.
In the Middle East, tens of thousands of Israelis protested outside their parliament against controversial judicial reform plans which have divided the country. Israel has seen some of its biggest demonstrations in years since the plans were unveiled last month, plans which will curb the Supreme Court's power and give the government more say over judicial appointments. The government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, says the current system is undemocratic, added that the reforms will strengthen it, but critics say it will undermine democracy. Yesterday, Israel's own president Isaac Herzog warned that the country was on the verge of constitutional and social collapse. U.S. President Joe Biden appeared to weigh into the crisis yesterday, saying that the American democracy and Israeli democracy are both built on strong institutions, on checks and balances, and on an independent judiciary. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi is expected to depart from Tehran late today as he leads a large delegation to China at the invitation of President Xi Jinping. According to Iranian state media, the three-day trip is Mr. Raisi's first state visit to the Asian economic giant and the first by an Iranian president in 20 years. Mr. Raisi and Mr. Xi had first met on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Uzbekistan in September, where China supported Iran's now successful bid to become a full member of the organization. The Iranian president, who assumed office in August 2021, will be accompanied by a wide-ranging team, including the new central bank governor, 6 members of Mr. Raisi's cabinet, including ministers of economy, petroleum, foreign affairs, trade, transport and urban development, and agriculture are also part of the delegation. And in Asia, Philippines have accused China of trying to prevent its Coast Guard from resupplying a contingent deployed at an atoll in the disputed South China Sea. The Philippine Coast Guard made this known in a statement stating that the crew of its ship, the Malapusca, encountered the Chinese Coast Guard vessel on February 6 at about 10 nautical miles from Aigan Shoal during a routine resupply trip to sailors stationed there. The Coast Guard disclosed that the Chinese ship shone a military-grade laser light twice at the Malapascua, causing temporary blindness to her crew at the bridge. The Guard added that the vessel made dangerous maneuvers and the Malapascua altered its course to head towards Lawak Island. Aigan Shoal lies about 105 nautical miles northwest of the Philippine province of Palawan in the disputed Spratly Island. And talking sports, Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp says he expects a tough challenge against Everton after Sean Dyche got off to a stunning start against Arsenal last weekend. The new toughest boss masterminded a 1-0 victory over the league leaders in his opening game and takes his newly emboldened side to Anfield today. But Klopp, in his pre-game press conference, said he is wary of the threat that the blue side of Merseyside will pose while remaining bullish about his players' chances. Club further reiterated his commitment to the club, stating that he is 100% committed to the club, win or lose.
People forget that, to be honest. But if I would have a look at it, I would say, okay, you had difficult spells, but always at the end of the time. so I mean, mine's not only. We had difficult times during the whole time, if you want. And Dortmund it was probably in the beginning and in the end. So that's so I understand that people think that I will not and I cannot go. I'm responsible, too much responsibility, and I want it, and I want it. So again, I said this is a difficult time. So, but it's a little bit like I don't enjoy it. But if we could show in this difficult time that even then, especially then, this club is so special because we believe in everything. If people believe in me, yeah, then we have to go through this together because then we have to. When we come out, we will have great times again. Yes, and it's maybe the difficult times are now a bit too long already for me as well. And news with a difficult season. We have 5-6 points more. We spoke about that already, and then it's still not a great season, but.
Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, says 240 polling units across the country do not have any registered voters, which will impede conduct of the general election in those locations. The United States has told its citizens to leave Russia immediately due to the war in Ukraine and the risk of arbitrary arrest or harassment by Russian law enforcement agencies. Opposition Labour Party has accused the UK Conservative government of overseeing lavish spending on hotels, hospitality and other costs using taxpayer-funded debit cards. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. Thank you for watching. On behalf of the entire transmission team, I am Tunde Ido. Good evening.